Welcome to the wilds of Atmos, because today we are talking all about the lore behind the newest game that I have been obsessed with. That is Legacy of Atmos, which is up on Kickstarter right now. I've had the good fortune of playtesting this game in its development, as well as getting to know the people creating it, and there are just some fantastic hobbyists who are very passionate about making a really cool game. And when they reached out to me, I was like, oh, okay, well, how much lore do you guys have for Legacy of Atmos? And so I actually had the chance to sit down and chat with the kind of lore master they have and ask a few questions. And so I'm going to share that lore with you. And I'm going to kick it off with sort of a preface, sort of like a prehistory setting of what Legacy of Atmos is in terms of what kind of fantasy it is. So, for an unknown span of time, the universe was filled with vast amounts of almost nothing. The only thing governing the cosmos were forces of nature, like gravity, time, those kinds of things. And slowly, over eons, whatever small particles existed swirled and amassed until one day, the governing forces compressed into something close to sentience. This was a natural formation of life, and they called themselves the Eldian Titans. Now, over the next several thousands of years, the Titans gained more and more sentience and intelligence until they started to populate worlds with life, like they truly became natural-born gods. Each world had entirely new creations that matched the Titans' various physical forms. And this was a golden age of creation and experimentation, and they even made a kind of a subclass, like a minor god class called the Soul Stars. And so they are beings of consciousness and pure molten energy type thing. They were born into the universe to help the Eldians govern and watch over their creations. And so you can see this is a great creation myth, right? The gods are naturally formed, they start spreading life, and then they kind of create demigods of a sense to help them govern. Eventually, though, as life and experience evolved, other forces started to emerge into the Eldian Titans' consciousness. It was through this that things like jealousy, joy, and greed, and empathy, and envy, and 1,000 other emotions were born into existence. Now, this kind of growth, and like I said, they're always accumulating more will and intelligence and sentience. When this change started to happen, things fell apart very quickly, because they started to be pulled towards certain groups of emotions. The first time you experience joy, you're like, oh, I want more of that. And so they lean towards that. Whereas others, once they experienced envy, it kind of consumed their whole mentality. Eventually, Athul Zahn, Eldian Titan of Destruction, in his curiosity, ripped apart a soul star and desolated the surrounding worlds, turning them into dust. He essentially, they're all building things. He's like, what is it like to destroy? And so he started playing with destruction. That act started a ripple effect, which eventually led to the Lost War of creation and divided the Eldians into two manners of beings. There's the Titans of Gaia, which is like life and life-giving energies, and the Titans of Destruction. Now, this war was fought for a millennium as the forces of Gaia and Destruction converted or forced worlds into submission to their side. Thousands of worlds were destroyed or enslaved, and countless billions were killed. In the end, the Eldian Titans of Destruction were just too powerful of an enemy, and they ended up pretty much winning the war and shattered the Gaia Titans and kind of like spread them like their remnants all across the cosmos. What worlds remained in the Destruction's care were enslaved for their own power and amusement. Now that is like some deep, primordial cosmic prehistory stuff. It's been a long, long time since the Lost War of Creation. The setting is now on the new planet of Elpis, whose creations are all offsprings of one of the few surviving Gaia Titans and Soul Star god, Athul, which is a name that shows up very, very frequently in the Beastmen kind of half of the set, the Tellus Commune. However, their plans with the world of Elpis are unknown, with very few of its inhabitants being aware of the great struggle within the cosmos. So while no one on the planet that we're on, like the setting takes place of Elpis, no one really knows like the Athul and the whole Civil War thing happened. All they know is that Athel is real and that he watches his creation evolve and fight and improve their societies and kind of grow under his gaze. So that is sort of our prehistory leading up to this. There's a lot more going on in the setting than just steampunk versus forest folk, but that is the current kind of timeline that we're playing in, and we can dance around, and all of a sudden those evil primordial cosmic forces can enter in later on. So there's a lot of open room for adding factions, for adding depth, but right now we have a fantastic start with two factions that really oppose each other. One is the Tellus Commune, which is sort of the powers of nature and Gaia that's what it's there on the planet to do, is just love life and create things for its own beauty. And the other faction we get to play is the Atmos Federation, which is essentially humans that have evolved on the planet of Gaia and have used its resources and that kind of stuff and are now expanding into whatever they want to do, sciences and technology and stuff. Now, at this point, I started to ask a bunch of, I think, kind of good general questions to kind of get a grasp on what a fantasy setting is like. And so I wanted to talk about a few of those questions and go over those answers regarding each faction in this box. So first question I asked was, what is magic like? And in Legacy of Atmos, magic and science are very much blended together, sort of like alchemy as well is sort of in there as well. And every living thing in Elpis has some sort of crystal or shard or stone embedded inside of them. So the natural wildlife is very connected to the earth, and those things can be harvested by humans to be able to power different types of things. Now, for the Atmos Federation, what their magic looks like, just over 50 years ago, astronomers within the Atmos Federation discovered a cryptic language within the constellation of stars. Though this discovery and new technology advancements that they made from it allowed them to figure out how to generate energy from the natural occurring crystals and turn it into machines of arcane power. The planet provided the batteries, they found a way to take star energy and charge them, which gave them access to machines. Thus, astromancers were born. Now, astromancers, they're not actually spellcasters, like in the typical sense, but rather they embed crystals into devices on their arms, called diffusers, and convert that into usable energy. So they're not just like manifesting and commanding natural energy, but they're essentially taking that battery that they've powered up and bringing it to the battlefield. And that's what happens when they cast spells. It's just they're expending the power of the battery. Now, conversely, there is the Tellus Commune, and they are literally and figuratively sometimes made and formed from these crystals and stones and shards that just scatter all over the planet. And it looks like the Gaia Titan Athel created this world with that in mind. In contrast to the humans of the Atmos Federation, the creatures of the Tellus Commune can use magic by instinct rather than science or technology. They can naturally tap into that energy. While each individual being within the Telnar forest may have less or more affinity or natural power to their instinctual magics, ultimately they are strictly kept to their own type of magic. So, if you have people who can command powers of the water or the wind or something like that, there's not a lot of cross-pollination when it comes to how they learn magics from one another. Everyone just kind of knows one. And I kind of take this as a narrative reason why within the Tellus Commune as a faction, there's a lot of keyword restricted magic. So like things that the Kareth, meaning like the beastmen of the faction, their spells tend to revolve around other Kareth rather than affecting everything in the entire faction. Now, the next question I asked, which made more sense for the Atmos Federation, is asking about technology. Like, where are they at technologically? They have steampunk-oriented technology, so think somewhat like the 1800s of our time, Victorian era, that kind of thing, mixed with these astromagics of the constellation. So they have steampunk technology, and then you've just in the last 50 years injected, extreme battery powers from using the stars to power crystals and things like that. They also have full ballistic weapons. This means they have guns like Gatling guns, and also different kinds of weird and wacky inventions like a fission cannon and lava blaster. They just experiment wildly with all the different types of physics and science and energies that they can kind of come into contact with. Whereas the Tellus Commune, their general harmony with nature and Athel have kept their technology to a tribal or sort of a primitive level. However, they do utilize ancient forms of power that Athel has directly showed them. An example of this would be like they have secret passageways through the forest that allow them to traverse massive amounts of distance. It's called the Seven Soul Trees, basically like think almost teleporters, but not quite. And so like they understand how to use nature in cool and unique ways. So then I asked, okay, well, we have an idea of, the setting, the cosmic history here and the creation myth and all that. We have what magics are like, so that's going to help us understand the rules of the universe. Then we have our technology level. What are the factions like? Meaning those other things that we talked about before are sort of like general rules that exist, like natural laws. But what kind of people or societies do those things form? And so we'll talk about that with the Atmos Federation. The Atmos Federation were a bunch of ever-warring city-states ruled by an old and powerful great houses until the first Telnar War, which was about 25 years ago. So to put that in a time span, they discovered, astromancy, and then 25 years after that, once they have all these shiny new weapons, they all went to war with one another, or they were in war, and then suddenly got some peace after 25 years of almost totally annihilating themselves. And on the brink of that destruction, the armies of the Great Houses combined, and the Atmos Federation was born. And these are the Great Houses that you and I have rules access to when we're playing the game. Together, they were able to unify and push back the Telnar invasion, which was the Tellus Commune, which is the other faction in this core set, into their lands and have been the Atmos Federation ever since. So they were all bickering and fighting with one another, and then when a real true threat posed itself, everyone really got on the same team quite quick, which is how it tends to happen. Through their unification and war, the Atmos Federation is now currently in a period of enlightenment and renaissance with their steampunk technologies and astro magics developing at a rate never seen before, because now they have shared resources, they're more secure internally, like their internal borders with one another, and so now real inspiration has room to happen. Now, as far as what the faction as a whole of the Tellus Commune is like, the Tellus Commune is largely a loosely aligned group of creatures and species that all live within the Telnar forest, right on the border of the Atmos Federation. They all live and uphold the cycle of change and life, with sentient members often warring within each other, hunting and gathering and that kind of stuff, the various beasts and the creatures of the forest. Or they become prey to these creatures themselves. Essentially, it's just the natural food chain is happening, and then when Athel or some spirit of Gaia initiates it, a war party will brew, and all of these different tiers of the food chain will all of a sudden work together and go hunting humans. However, each and every one of them is united by their worship of the soul star god Athel, and they accept the rule of his 7 daughters that came down to the world. We can play as one of them in the game. When they're called on by one of these daughters, the members and creatures of the Telnar forest unite into a powerful force of tribe and beast and magic and all these kinds of things. And what I love is how this plays out on the table, where some of the more beastly, units that we can control, like the Kralis Wolf and the Saplings, the second they get too far away from some of these like more sentient or more standalone characters, they go feral and they lose that kind of synapse that they're locked in. So that's kind of a great way of rules representing, well, when you're close to us, we dominate your mind and we can order, a wild wolf to do very specific things, but the minute it starts getting too far away, we start to lose that grip. Now, I looked at the artwork and kind of got a sense of like the cosmic, war going on above us that none of these characters know about. And so I asked about the tone of the setting, right? I mean, not every game is quote unquote grim dark. And the answer was the tone of the overall setting is one that is optimistically dark. The humans, with their astropunk society, are a bit humorous with their wacky inventions. However, there are greater forces and conflicts and tensions within the world of Legacy of Atmos. Namely, the fact that no one quite knows what Athel, this titan of Gaia, is actually doing, but there is a plan in place, because I guess to him, the war of the gods is still raging, right? Athel is ever watching and preparing his children for some unknown purpose. Now, this specific box set actually focuses on High Lord Ronan and his crusade into the Telnar forest. He's formed a large army that encompasses his newly rebuilt Great House of Ronin, members of the Astromantic Order, and even a large contingent of the Church, like sort of the religious faction of the humans. And he wants justice and vengeance over the Tellus Commune for butchering his home and murdering his family 20 years ago in the First Telnar War. So kind of the stakes, I guess, is sort of the point, like the overall tension of this specific box set. It's just an intro box set, but there's going to be more things that tell the story or continue the story later on. But for this box set, it's the humans going into the forest to try and drive them out. Be like, no, you just brought an extinction level event upon yourself. And the forces of the forest, representing literally the planet as a whole, are like, no. You don't control this. And so it's sort of like a creator versus creation type thing. Now I'm going to end this video like I end all of my videos, talking about why is this so cool. You know, I've gushed about this game for several days now, and I'm going to be for quite some time later, because I really do think it is a winner. I think it's a game that can bring a lot to this hobby and is very intro friendly. As far as like what it entices me from a lore perspective, the setting of Legacy of Atmos is pretty interesting because there is a lot more happening behind where we drop the players in the story. So like, yes, this specific box set is about a crusade of the humans being really mad about being spanked too hard by the forest early on, right? It's a vengeance quest, essentially. However, the humans have no idea about the unknown war of creation, and their concern is more about the day-to-day conflicts and short-term political strife within their federation, whereas the Tellus Commune, and therefore Athel, the god that basically runs this planet, or at least guides it, have a much bigger perspective, a much more cosmic mindset. And so there are things happening. There will be enemies that come in and bring the war of the gods to this planet. And it's like the humans just don't even know what is happening. You don't even know how small you are. And so there's little elements of like cosmic horror there mixed with, you don't begrudge these humans. It's like, well, they came and they decimated one of our great houses and tore apart our civilization. We can't let that stand. So to them, this war is everything. Whereas to the Tellus Commune, it's like, this is a minor nuisance in the grand scheme. And I love that. I love when two factions go to head and they're like equal forces, but their perspectives are so vastly different. One important thing to note is that Legacy of Atmos is not just about dark, eternal war. There's going to be more subtle conflicts within the denizens of the planet, and while the Tellus Crusade is one of the most major conflicts of the last 25 years, much of that time has been relatively peaceful and sort of been a golden age between societies. Now, there are plans to release quite a few more factions coming in the first 2 years of the game's launch, and the tone will be a kind of a mix of like optimism and confusion, political subtlety, alliances, conflict, rather than just war for the sake of it. So they do plan to expand into a really full narrative of what's going on between this cosmic horror of these, gods destroying worlds and everything, and mixed with the fact that like here on this little pocket of nowhere, life has thrived. Gaia is winning in this battle, in particular Athel is, but even in its most successful state, there's still growing pains by having living things having their own autonomy, like humans who can choose to destroy forests and things like that. So it's a cool mix of steampunk, which is just a genre of fantasy that I personally love above all else, like I just do, but then mixed with things like cosmic horror and this idea of natural balance, natural order, and structure and all that kind of stuff. So I eat that stuff up. So friends, that is going to do it for me. If you have any questions about Legacy of Atmos or you want to learn more about it through the Kickstarter, go ahead and check out the link in the description below. Like I said, if this game gets fully funded, and I do hope it does, I am going to continue coverage of this as well as ongoing lore bits that are dropped about various units and factions and things like that. Thank you all so much for watching and listening, and we'll catch you next time. Happy wargaming.